Welcome to Keep It Humane, the podcast, where we dive deep into topics surrounding kindness, compassion, and creating a more humane world, whether it's in our communities, in the workplace, or in the world of animal control and shelters. With our hosts,
Ashley Bishop.
And Ashley Bishop.
And I'm Daniel Ettinger. This show is sponsored by Tomahawk Live Trap. Check them out, livetrap.com. Welcome. Welcome to the. I don't even see. I don't have Bishop or Bishop here, so I lose all tracks of everything. This is Keep It Humane, the podcast, and both bishops. I haven't done a single non-co-host show in a very long time, so they're going to listen to this and tell me all the things I did wrong afterwards. So I really appreciate that from them. Just really quick, I want to thank our sponsors. That is Tomahawk Live Trap. You know, they've been in business for 100 years, family owned and operated business that works with humane professionals around the world to produce the safest and most effective animal handling equipment. You can save 10% on their products by using discount code Keep It Humane. You have to say it like that because it's Keep It Humane in all caps. Use that on their website, which is livetrap.com, or call them at 800-272-8727. And today's gonna be a fun episode. I have a great guest, a return guest. I would like to say a friend of the show, Daphna Nachminovitch with PETA. That's People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. That's right, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. Daphna, welcome and thanks for coming back. Really,
Thank you so much for having me again.
really loved your last episode, and our listeners can check that out if they just go and check the hundreds. It's crazy to say that hundreds of episodes that we have. You have to kind of scroll back a few years, but we did a really cool show, and I remember you talked about the beagle case, the
Yeah.
4,000 beagles at that time.
Yes.
That was pretty kind of recent to
That
that.
was fun.
Yeah, your team had a big impact on that, correct?
Yeah, well, we did the undercover investigation that sort of started a chain reaction, if you will, and went into the facility to show the world what was really in there because we had been concerned about conditions in that facility for some time, and the facility had a significant budget and a lot of influence, and so of course they put up a front to say everything's okay. And so it was really valuable to have the undercover investigation. And we got the USDA to go back in and cite them and so on, and got some bills passed in Virginia as well. So very proud to have been part of that. And we got to place 25 of the beagles thanks to a transfer partner. So that was, for my heart, that was the most exciting part. But in the big picture, there was a lot more than that.
And that's the cool thing about the work we do. And I think it gets lost in some of the minutia of ego in this profession, which we're going to probably jump into in a little bit. I know specifically, like, sure, I may have like a louder voice and be involved in other things, but I try to separate that self from the aspects of how can I help people help animals, and that's the main focus for me. But as we break down today and talk about some of the things that are going on in our industry, we're going to see where ego gets involved and how it truly separates. It creates these silos that we don't need. Just really quick too for our listeners, if it's their first time checking in or they didn't hear your last podcast episode, which again was probably at this point, probably I want to say it was like 2 years ago. You are the
I think it was.
senior vice president of cruelty investigations with PETA, and people may not know that you have that section. They may think that that PETA just runs around and throws red paint on people's leather jackets, which we
It's a
know is.
rumor.
I know it's not true. We know.
Stop it. Stop reinforcing that rumor.
But when we talk about the stereotype of everything in the profession, whether it's with animal shelters, the dog catcher, or PETA, you guys do so much more. So do you mind just briefly talking quickly like about your program?
Oh, I would love to. So I've been with PETA since 1997, and my experience in this field is I started right out of college at an animal shelter downtown Chicago called the Anti-Cruelty Society, which taught me a lot of what knew in order to even apply at PETA. And so I oversee our cruelty investigations department, which includes not just undercover investigations, but also 4 mobile spay neuter clinics that travel to underserved areas of southeastern Virginia and actually beyond that as well, because we're in very high demand, as you can imagine. So we have four state-of-the-art clinics, and we have a field program called Community Animal Project, which goes into impoverished areas, delivers dog houses, gives out free food, provides free spay neuter and free transport to spay neuter on our clinics, provides euthanasia services for people whose animals are at the end of their lives, or for animals who are frankly turned away from other shelters because they are euthanasia candidates. So we have this program, which in Virginia we are an animal shelter, and we have to submit our numbers to the state like every other animal shelter or releasing agency. And we have a shelter in our office in downtown Norfolk, Virginia, which is not a traditional shelter. It's essentially a series of guest rooms where we hold animals. They don't we don't we, it's not a traditional shelter, but we, hold animals. Mostly if we have an animal long term, we'll place them in a foster home because we don't want them to be confined to a room. But in essence, we do a lot of sheltering, and we track these, trends across the country, and we try to assist shelters and shelter workers across the country. But we also have experienced the consequences of what you and I are going to talk about today firsthand, just by virtue of having a shelter and by virtue of providing services that a shelter should provide, but some of them have stopped providing.
And I mean, we're right on topic for that. I think it's so important for our listeners to, again, let's remove like I guess let's remove judgment from this episode. I want people to listen to this with just really an open mind. And I'm seeing more and more of almost the 180. So what we're kind of hinting at is this no kill terminology or this no kill ideology where shelters are going to have this 90% live release rate no matter what happens. They're going to make sure that they're at 90% or higher, and that's the motivation. I haven't met a shelter that subscribes to that ideology to say, okay, yeah, 90% sure we want to have a low euthanasia rate, but they're not talking about the programs that really get us there. And I mean that. Like I don't hear the push like you just brought up the fact that you have these mobile spay and neuter clinics. We have a organization that has over $100 million to their name. And I'm going to read something here from PETA's website in a second. But why is their focus? Why is that push on no kill versus spay and neuter 2025 or spay and neuter 2030? That's where I feel the biggest disconnect comes in this profession, because the most people that are in this job truly want to help people help animals. And what happened, I would say, in my view of it, and Daphna, you may have a better perspective. When do you think that no kill trend started really ramping up? When do you think it like became almost fad's not the right word because people are still doing it, but when do you think it became, in a sense, trendy or more popular than it's ever been?
That's a good question. I'm terrible with that kind of stuff, but I would say definitely in the last decade, we have seen a shift where there's more of a willingness by animal shelters, including publicly funded ones, to essentially, as you say, the motivation is to reach a statistical goal, which, we're going to talk about this, but it's a very randomly picked statistical goal that, is being used across our country, whether you're in an affluent area or you're in an impoverished area, regardless of what services exist in that area, if there is a low cost or free spay neuter clinic, regardless of what the ordinances are, it's this sort of one size fits all, nothing else matters but this goal. And what it has, in my view, what it has caused is a tremendous amount of animal suffering and a dereliction of duty by taxpayer funded animal shelters, that is, heartbreaking. And I see it as the big picture as we track media reports and calls from, colleagues in the animal sheltering world, as well as just the calls we get for help locally, which should have been addressed by the taxpayer funded animal shelter without fail. And they're very often not. So I hope that answers your question, but I think I would say that in the last few years, I've definitely seen more of a willingness by um, I don't know if it's a willingness or, capitulation, but more of a trend in taxpayer funded animal shelters. And I think part of that is the targeting of government officials,
Mhm.
relentless, and I'm going to use the word bullying because I think there's a lot of that. Um, so I think that we have seen a sort of, capitulation, if you will, or a misunderstanding of what it all means to the animals and the people who care about them, who may be in a position to no longer be able to care for them, which is heartbreaking enough. So
And you bring up a good point. One of the things that I've noticed over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, we're starting to get states or cities or counties becoming a no-kill county or a no-kill state. And so they're, I feel like what's happening is they're getting this pressure, they're not understanding the full picture, and then they're jumping into something that's trendy because it's an emotional, I think, an emotional attachment to, well, we're saving the majority of animals, we're saving the community's animals, which again, I don't look, I don't think either of us want to have an animal euthanized on us. I mean, if anything, we'd probably be one of the last two that in this world that would want that. But we're also practical in the aspects of what needs to be done in our communities. And I mean, you have, and I don't know if you followed the Danville, Virginia case.
I
Uh,
do very closely. Yeah.
yeah, and when you brought up
It's my state.
I know. I was going to say, and you. So we had Paulette. She's the man director of the of that shelter, and we had her on the show a couple about maybe a year ago at this time, and she was getting bullied. Like she received phone calls, and you can go and check that episode out. Like best friends basically organized a group against Danville Animal Shelter and did some really horrible things just because her numbers were not what they thought were appropriate for euthanasia. And here's something you talked about that I kind of want to just let's get this out there now, and then as
Let's do it.
we go in there and we break it down. So you said there's no real support for that 90% benchmark, this golden rule that they came up with, that 90% should be considered no kill. If you look at that data, and I've tried Nathan Winograd, who's an attorney and worked at a shelter in New York at some point, he's kind of the father of this 90% live release rate thing. And I've done my research. We've asked Nathan to come on the podcast. He has politely declined, and that's totally his choice. But he took data from shelters that have low intake, that have a higher socioeconomic community. So now we have animals in this community that are not often stray or not often being handled, under cruelty investigations or dangerous dogs, etc. So he had a small sample size, and he basically said, "Well, our shelter only has to really euthanize 5% of our population, and to make it more attainable for the country, we're going to come up with this golden rule of 90%." That's the data that I had, and I don't know if you've heard anything
I
different.
haven't. I
So
haven't heard anything different, and I haven't done a deep dive into it because I think it's nonsense.
it is, but it is. It 100% is, and it's an arbitrary number with an emotional attachment. Well, 10% is good, so like we'll roll with that 90%. I I would love I would love for us to, if they want to find data and stats to support it, do I mean, this would be a huge project, but let's talk about animals coming into the shelter in Memphis, Tennessee, Detroit, Michigan, right? Chicago, Illinois, some of these bigger cities that we have in the country, and tell me that 10% of the population are less than 10% of the population are aggressive in the community or have medical issues that are,
And
some
you would have to take that sample data from truly open admission shelters. If the
truly,
policy
yeah.
is to keep out all of the potential euthanasia candidates or say that we're full, then that data is not
Mhm.
accurate. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's just nonsense.
I it is. And so when we lay that groundwork here as far as like there isn't data that supports it. You can sit here and say yes there is, but no one can prove it. And there's nothing There's no one that's ever brought me any sort of paperwork, and I've asked this question multiple times, that shows how they came up with this 90%. It was a group of people that made a decision in a vacuum. It caught on and became popular, and here we are. And so, one of the things that we did to kind of counter that, and a friend of mine, a friend of ours here on the podcast, who has their own podcast called the Animal Welfare Junction, she also owns her own um, spay and neuter actually mobile clinics, the Rascal Unit. It's really an amazing thing. She's Dr. G. She's an amazing veterinarian out of Ohio. But she helped me kind of create smart shelters or smart rescues, smart shelters and smart rescues. And the whole concept of that was saving more animals responsibly together, where we could look at not an arbitrary number, but how we can make a community effort on keeping animals out of the shelter. And what that looks like is ultimately access to care. Like, how do we bring care to communities and stop the floodwaters by spaying and neutering and keeping animals out of the shelter versus trying to live to this uh, unattainable goal, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the other thing about that goal is if I can just take a moment to talk about the term itself, which I know you're going to read something from our website. I imagine it's the paragraph we have on each page of this feature, but the term itself, as someone I started in sheltering in 1993 right out of college, and I was uh a lot more optimistic probably back then, I think I would say. And just you know, I don't know if naive is there, but I just didn't know, what reality was for animals. And I'd grown up with two dogs who moved with my family from, across the world, around the world, from Israel to Africa to France, and we never left our dogs behind ever. So when people would come in and just dump their dogs because they couldn't be bothered to find an apartment, or, it was a new thing to me. But anyway, I started out in this field many, many years ago, and it's just the way that it has changed has been totally heartbreaking. And one of those things is just the term no kill, which means that people who start at an animal shelter right out of college for 6.50 an hour and
Hmm.
end up in the euthanasia room trying to make an animal's last moments um, filled with love and dignity and positivity and trying to make their exit a kinder one are called killers.
Hmm.
That's just not okay. And that's what that term means, is that you kill. And, no, the shelters are not the ones breeding. They're not the ones abandoning, and they're in most cases not the ones neglecting. We're not creating the problem. We're trying to address the problem. And so it's especially ironic for me to see, this sort of, this nonsense of community sheltering, when it's like, if you want to involve the community, involve them in prevention,
Hmm.
involve them in access to spay neuter, spay or block, or, you know, just help. There are people out there who, even people who are not low income people now, because of the veterinary workforce shortage and all of these things that are happening that are making our crisis worse, even, who need help.
Hmm.
Just with paying for a vet visit or antibiotics or something that will help them retain their animal whom they love, who's a well cared for animal, but they just don't have the means. So I just wanted to address the term because I think the term itself is such a clever slogan, but it
Hmm.
really has a ripple effect that hurts people, good people, people who have dedicated their lives to this field. It's not a field of roses. It's really hard.
Hmm.
And, I have very specific memories of animals I euthanized in the early 90s whom I loved with all my heart. I kept their tags, I kept their collars, I kept their kennel cards. I remember them. I remember the people who surrendered them. I
Hmm.
mean, you know, we suffer with these animals. And so I think just the term itself is a very big problem, um, in that it casts us an aspersion on the whole field of
It's
open
been
admission sheltering.
it's been weaponized, truly.
It's been weapon for sure.
100%. And like you said, it's a brilliant slogan. I mean, if you think about Save Them All or No Kill, like that hits right at the heartstrings for people that
It
don't
sure does.
understand the industry. So it's absolutely brilliant.
And who
Now,
doesn't want that,
I know. Yeah,
I mean, I do.
I
You
know.
do,
I know.
you know?
The reality is we do, but what you said really hits home when we're weaponizing it against shelters that they don't have a choice. Like, what are you talking about? There's somebody that, like you said, gets paid at the low end of the spectrum, and their job is to do all the hard work. They're in there basically making a relationship with this animal. They feed it every day, they clean up after it,
Yes.
and then they have to walk it to the euthanasia room. But
Yes.
they're the bad guy when it's the person in the community that isn't spaying, neutering, or they moved, or they lied to their landlord. They couldn't have a pet, whatever it was, and now they got rid of it. So it weaponizes it against shelters, and then you have this divide where it's, are you a kill shelter or a no kill shelter? And neither exists in the aspects of
And
that.
it's just a terrible, terrible term, and I would just discourage your listeners from ever using it because it's hurtful and
Mhm.
it is divisive. And I mean, I work with I mean, some of our transfer partners are limited admission, and they've stopped using that term, some of them, because it just causes pain and harm, and it does not is not conducive to collaboration and doing
Yeah.
things together. It's like us against them. We don't
Yeah,
euthanize, you kill.
correct.
It's wrong. It's just wrong.
And really that's why Smart Shelter was created. So when someone asks, "Are you a no-kill shelter?" you can just respond, "No, we're a smart shelter." And then they can break down that community collaboration piece. Let's jump into this quick paragraph. I want to read this. This would kind of drew me back into reaching out and talking. So on PETA.org, you can go to PETA.org/features/best friends animal society. And there's a whole thing about it, but I want to read the one paragraph, and then we'll break down uh, some of this. And look, they do some good. Like, I'm not just saying because we're going to go in and talk about this piece. There is some aspects in the community that they do, but I really want our listeners to understand from this perspective too. It's about perspective. So Best Friends Animal Society, a Utah based group who last reported annual revenue of $173 million, has for years misled the public, promising America's no kill nation by 2025, an absurd claim not based on any semblance of reality. A recent opinion piece by the organization's CEO conceded that its position is that keeping pets out of shelters should be the first choice management protocol. This philosophy, which Best Friends Animal Society has pressured shelters across the nation to embrace, has deprived countless animals and people who care about them desperately in need of help. Using bullying tactics and personal attacks, including the frequent use of the divisive term no kill and referring to compassionate euthanasia in animal shelters as killing, Best Friends Animal Society has created a culture of hate and resentment towards individuals who dedicate their lives to helping homeless animals, including by alleviating their suffering when that is the most humane option. Due to funding from well meaning, caring people like you who have believed that No Kill 2025 was a genuine promise, the organization's influence has been significant, and the group has spawned additional, similar, if less well known entities that push the same harmful policies, which lead to a terrible animal suffering and even more death through not painless or peaceful processes. And I kind of want to talk about that last part. What we have, and I've always been given resistance to this from people inside of Best Friends, and I'm sure they're listening. And it's nothing. It's not personal. I'm just going to keep it 100, as the kids say. They always try to tell me that the misconnection or the disconnect isn't from the community, the general public. It's only from people in this industry, and I'm just dumbfounded by that answer because all of my experiences and I can list examples. One was I was teaching in a room full of social workers in San Antonio. And the first question I was asked, are there any kill shelters left in the United States? This is somebody that's not in the industry whatsoever. So their view of it is already influenced by this Best Friends no kill. A teacher at a grade school, a French bulldog that she had in her possession, right? That had a microchip. The first thing she asked, are you going to kill it? And so these stories are real, and the people have this misconception, and then to top that off, you have these rescue groups that think they're doing the right thing, which they're essentially organized hoarders, and they're putting animals in these situations where they're not getting the care that they need, and now they're warehousing them because they think that they're the only ones that can provide the care, love, compassion, where the municipal shelter, it's the kill shelter, so I can't trust them.
And we're seeing municipal shelters released to these hoarder rescues by the dozens. And then they have, another jurisdiction or their jurisdiction has to address it, or they leave it unaddressed. But it's obviously warehousing is inhumane, animals. I don't even know where to start with that because I feel like, we somehow it's easy for people to lose sight of the fact that the animals who are warehoused in these situations are individuals like the dogs and the cats that we have in our homes, and they have anxiety and they're
Mhm.
afraid, and they're not getting basic necessities, sometimes basic necessities of life, but always companionship, exercise, praise, individual attention, a home, and so I certainly don't subscribe to the belief that any life is better than no life. I think quality of life has been completely lost in this trend. Is just basically that, I mean, just like the CEO said in that op-ed, it's like the worst thing that could happen, is going into a shelter because maybe that animal will be euthanized. Well, I beg to differ. That's not the worst thing that could happen. And I've seen many, many, many horrible things happen to animals who were turned away from shelters. They suffered greatly.
Greatly.
So I don't think euthanasia in an animal shelter is the worst thing that can happen. Do I think, I mean, of course, we all want needless euthanasia to end, but keeping animals out of the shelter is not the way to do that. And I know we're going to talk more, but we're certainly seeing that when animals are turned away, and I'm going to talk about cats specifically. There's no verification that those animals are altered, and yet,
Hmm.
the what people are told is just put them back where you found them. Well, you're breeding cats then,
Hmm.
like that's not TNR. It's not return to field. It's just abandonment. It's like, I mean, I had a young woman come by our shelter a couple of days ago with two intact female cats that she found, according to what she told me, she found them in a dumpster behind a mall.
Hmm.
She took them to the local shelter, and the local shelter told her to put them back where she found them. They're intact females, young, so I don't know, 8, 10 months. And they basically told her put them back in the dumpster. Luckily, she didn't do that, and luckily she found them in a different city, and that city's shelter did take them in. She took them to the wrong city, but that city didn't tell her take them to this other city. Told her to put them back. No effort to ensure that they're spayed. I mean, I that's not how is that advancing our cause? It's just causing suffering. It's causing more animals to be born into homelessness. It's the opposite of
And
what our mission is.
it's inviting an invasive species into the community as well. So that
That
impact,
too.
the impact that it
That too.
has in that community is great because of that. So you're absolutely right. And some of those horror stories of animals being turned away. Look, I get it. Trust me. I know, like many of you know that work in shelters, we're full. And I actually had a really cool, like, epiphany moment last week when I was in North Carolina and I was working with an awesome.
I have to wave to my neighbors. I'm
Hi,
sorry.
neighbors. Hey, guys. How y'all doing? Um, uh, really awesome time in Silva, North Carolina. Great group of people. Great country, by the way. It was gorgeous out there. I wish I had more time. But while we were in class, I was teaching about smart shelters and just talking about everything, like the history, the trends, the identification, everything. And one of the students in the class, when I said we were talking about 90%, they were like, why can't that 90% be switched from live release to just 90% capacity? Like we never go above 90%. We always have 10% of open kennels because everybody that's listening is at 100% right now. And in fact, our last episode that we had, this was just last week from Pinal County in Arizona, she's at 200%. So they have like 159 dog runs and they have like 300 animals or something like that. It's insane. And so we're putting these animals in situations where we're not doing the job the way that I think, in my professional and personal opinion, should be done in the aspects of public health, public safety, and then the compassionate needs for the community. And I don't think any shelter or animal control agency should be judged off the live release rate. We should be judged on what are we doing in our community to make an impact on those animals to keep them from either reproducing, coming into the shelter, providing, education to our like apartment complexes and landlords to let them know. And the ASPCA did a good study on this, that the cost of like damage from pets is minimal. The cost is actually more great. It's greater from people in homes, in rental apartments, ruining your home than it is an animal by far. So the it's very low. And so we have landlords that don't allow people to have pets. But even if, let's say, even if that barrier wasn't there, we would still have an overpopulation problem. That wouldn't fix it all. I think the big thing is finding ways to really sterilize the country's stray pets. Like that's the reality, and get to a point. Look, I'm all for helping out other communities, but we have a problem in our backyard. Should we be importing animals from other countries right now when we have animals literally in our backyard that are reproducing at an enormous rate? But it's a feel good thing. I got this dog from Ukraine, or I got this dog from Iran, because it's a feel good story. And look, it supports my ego and my mission. But the reality is there's a dog in Alabama right now that's been in the shelter for 426 days.
Yeah, and I just saw an article in the San Francisco paper too about the local, and I encourage your listeners to look it up because it was an interesting article, but it talked about how the SPCA is taking less animals from the animal control agency in the city and helping animals in other communities, and just sort of the conflict around that. But one of the things that troubled me, which you just alluded to, is sort of that the I hate saying live release rate. I feel like it's such a corporate term, and I don't love that, but it's using the euthanasia rate of the various shelters as a barometer of sorts in this article, which I think reporters, that's what they have, right? Those are the statistics that exist, and they like data, and I do get that. But I think that when you look at those statistics, they don't tell a story if you don't know what the intake policy is. They don't tell a story unless you know how many animals were turned away or given an appointment 3 months away, or people were told it's a $50 surrender fee per animal and they can't afford it. I mean, there's a whole backstory that isn't told with the so-called live release rate statistics or euthanasia statistics. And so we're basing, in this article, I think those rates were being used as some sort of, you know, just an indication of things. And I always think, well, okay, well, what other figures exist or aren't or don't exist and should exist? And what I think we would learn a whole lot if, our nation's shelters were required to keep track of the calls they don't answer or the calls they answer and don't give service to. Um, those animals don't vanish. And just because they're not euthanized at an animal shelter or taken in by the animal shelter doesn't mean they didn't suffer, doesn't mean
Correct.
they didn't die. And if they're very lucky, then maybe another agency took them in that did right by them. But really, at the end of the day, our communities are in need and they're not getting the service that in the case of publicly funded animal shelters, they're certainly not getting the services they pay for. But I think also when you talk about, you mentioned someone at Best Friends saying, we only hear from within the industry, not the citizens or
Hmm.
not the public.
Yeah.
The public doesn't know what they don't know. They
Hmm.
don't know. I mean, how would they know? I mean, you and I wouldn't know this stuff if we didn't live and breathe it every day.
100%.
And it's also complex. I've talked to reporters um, about this, and it just takes a minute to kind of draw the full circle. Like, yes, but if they're not taking them in, then they don't have to count them in their statistic. There's all this sort of, it's more complex than they thought it would be. And so you have to have someone who is willing to not just listen, but sort of try to understand. And it's hard. It's hard, I think, for just speaking from personal experience, talking to legislators, talking to the media, talking to, I, ironically, I mean, I do find that actually members of the public really get it. I
Mm.
mean, they get it if you talk to them,
Hmm.
if you explain it. It's so sensible. It makes sense. It's just honest. It's just reality. And they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. They're not politicians who have to,
Mm.
have a good sounding, something or other. They're not, they just, I mean, that's just my personal experience, and so it's a sad state of affairs right now because we are seeing things that maybe they feel good to some people. I wouldn't feel good if I turned an animal away who needed help, but
It's
it
tough.
seems that a lot of people are perfectly fine with saying no. I would be haunted, but
We put a poll up on our Facebook page, Keep It Humane. You can check that out. Just Keep It Humane on Facebook. We put the poll up like 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and the question was, if your shelter turns away somebody from surrendering and you find out they go to a park or something and abandon that dog, are you going to cite them criminally for abandonment? Isn't that, what do you think? Like that is like
I
the
mean, I'm seeing stories like that where
yeah,
somebody called or went and they were turned away and they
yeah,
left the animal in the parking lot and now they're charged with abandonment.
correct.
Okay, it's not okay. I'm not saying it's okay that they abandoned the animal. I mean, I'm not,
Yeah.
let's be very clear.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm not saying, however, we hear of people who have gone to seven different places or called seven different places. They're not getting help. They cannot keep they have to have somewhere to go.
Hmm.
So, if your city shelter is not that place, what are you supposed to do? I mean,
Hmm.
I don't know the answer to that. I think that it's really incumbent on our legislators and our public officials to study the reality of their own community,
I would love,
which I
yeah.
think, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say I would love to hear what a prosecutor would say about that,
Yeah.
or the defense would say, "Well, my client tried. My client was leaving the country or leaving the state. What were they supposed to do with that animal? Like the shelter is here for the community. They went, they tried to do it uh, that way, and then they were turned down, and so they just left it in the parking lot. Like, what are they going to do? Take it to the airport?" And in fact, when I worked in Denver, there were several times where I would pick up animals from the airport. Unfortunately,
Um,
um, I
it's
want to,
just really sad for those animals. I mean, for the people too, but obviously my heart
yeah,
starts with the animals because they don't know what's going on and they just know that life is not the same, you know?
absolutely. Can we, let's just switch gears a little bit and talk about, so you kind of talked about it in the beginning about some of the programs that PETA has to maybe help make an impact in our communities. So we're not having this overpopulation or we're not, um, you know, uh, worried about what our live release rate's going to be.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you want me to talk a little bit more about our
Yeah,
programs
just
and
like
how we
how
serve?
do you so yeah, let's clear this up really quick because I've always been a supporter and a fan of PETA. Not only have I had, family members work for PETA in the past, good family friends that are still connected in some ways or another. Um, and I support it. However, I have to put this out there, the caveat of, PETA does come with a stereotype, just like the dog pound does or the dog catcher does. Uh, so one of the things that has been thrown around, and please, with all due respect, don't take this the wrong way, but best friends gets labeled as the PETA of the animal shelter world because they have these like crazy views and kind of
Well, I
like
do object to that,
well,
but
I know you would. I know you would. But the reality of it being is I want people to know and hear from you directly. Like PETA is way more than changing the bullpen to the arm bar and like coming up with
oh
slogans
my
like that.
gosh.
So
Yes. Oh, yes.
let's talk about the things that PETA does maybe to help shelters that they just don't know exist.
Oh, sure. Yeah, but I do want to talk about a little bit, if you don't mind,
I
since
don't.
you've brought up the bullpen and the arm barn and that stuff. I mean, we're an international animal rights organization, so our mission statement is that animals are not ours to eat, wear, experiment on, use for entertainment, or abuse in any way.
Sure.
Essentially, our position is that animals have a right to exist, without interference, that we can have a very healthy full life by not consuming animals, wearing animals, harming animals. And so we're an animal rights organization. I mean, we're not shy about that.
Hmm.
The plight of animals in factory farms and on fur farms and in puppy mills and in circuses and laboratories, that alone will not get press.
Hmm.
But sometimes doing something goofy or
Hmm.
funny will
Hmm.
get press. Sometimes going naked will get press. Sometimes, putting a provocative billboard up will get press. So we get press in various ways that gives us the opportunity to talk about what life, if you can call it that, or what existence for animals on factory farms looks like. And that you can make a choice when you sit down to eat or when you go shopping. You can make a choice that fuels an industry that causes suffering and needless death, or you can make a choice that doesn't harm anybody. It's a nonviolent position, and I love it, and I subscribe to it, and I think that um, that's what it boils down to. But yes, we do goofy stuff,
Yeah.
but we also do a lot of very serious things like the Envigo undercover investigation.
Hmm.
My department's work is, I mean, we have a sense of humor, but man, our work is not funny.
Hmm.
It's starvation, it's neglect, it's cruelty, it's sexual abuse, it's
Hmm.
it's web-based cruelty, it's crush videos, it's dog fighting,
Hmm.
it's abuse of animals on factory farms, all of this stuff. It's ugly. But to talk about our sort of programs that are more shelter centric, or really, I mean, we've invested in these spay neuter clinics. We started spaying and neutering in 2001. We spay or neuter for the public, but we also spay or neuter for shelters and adoption agencies. We will do like a spay-a-thon in a underserved area. For example, in Galax, Virginia, we took two of our clinics and we were there for 3 days. So we did hundreds of animals in collaboration with the local Humane Society and a few other organizations. So we really focus on prevention. We put our money where our mouth is with the spay neuter. So no one is turned away for lack of funds. If
Okay.
somebody says, I have no money, we will do their animal for free. We will, I mean, I don't, we do all pit bulls for free. We do feral cats, not for free, some with exceptions, but we have a feral cat package, so to speak. So it's spay neuter, rabies, ear tip, and
Hmm.
it's a feline leukemia, feline AIDS test. And if the animal is positive, they are euthanized. We do not release sick feral cats back. And that's part of our policy. And if people don't like it, they can get their feral cats spayed or neutered somewhere else. Um, so we help shelters, not just locally by supporting their work. I mean, we support the work of our shelter partners. Most of the dogs we get for transfer are heartworm positive, so we will subsidize their treatment. If they have a broken leg, we will subsidize their treatment, that kind of thing. But across the country, we are a resource for shelters and individuals who are concerned about inhumane policies, whether they're turnaway policies or gas chambers,
Mm.
or, uh, you know, other cruel killing methods, or just um, inhumane, care in some facilities, animals sitting in their own waste or in water, or, doubled up. I mean, we've gotten complaints. A lot of the complaints we get, I hate to say this, but are as a result of so-called no-kill policies where animals are doubled up
Hmm.
and they kill each other. They don't know each other. We've heard from a woman who was in the hospital and her puppy was taken in for safekeeping, and the puppy was put in a kennel with another dog and she was killed.
Mm.
And the woman came out of the hospital and, her puppy was dead. So, yeah, I mean, we do have people. We have several people dedicated to these issues, these sheltering issues. We write to public officials on the reg, about we do not support TNR unless there are very specific um components of it. I mean, we do not support just willy-nilly abandoning cats outside to fend for themselves and harm native wildlife. Um, so anyway, we work very hard on sort of educating and also supporting and then providing services. So our animal shelter and our community animal project, our field work division, we spend millions of dollars every year helping people keep their animals, whether it's with food, it's veterinary care. If we can't do it on our clinic, very oftentimes we'll pay for it at a private clinic. These are the things that don't end up in the paper,
No.
you know? And so just know that
Yeah.
if you're a listener and you're not familiar with our work for companion animals, please, go to our website. We have a shorter URL for the Best Friends feature, which is just PETA.org/best friends
Oh,
to make
perfect.
life a little easier.
Yeah.
Um, but if I do encourage people to also go to our website and just go to PETA.org/PETA saves and just look at our video. At the end of each year, we put together a video of the previous year's 6 minutes of our what we do and why we euthanize and who we euthanize, because we are under fire quite a bit for our statistics. Um, and I would talk about our statistics any day with anybody because I know who we euthanize, and I think people in our, I hate to call it an industry, but in our field,
Field. Yeah.
would understand, hopefully. I mean, yes, for some animals, it's medical or it's end of life, but there are also animals whose behavioral health is far too damaged to be safely placed. And not just that they would be unsafe for placement, but it would be inhumane
Mhm.
to keep them, to keep them alive. I mean, I don't know that they don't understand that we mean well sometimes. And I remember a behaviorist telling us about a dog that we rescued who was very sweet with us, but questionable with newcomers in her foster home. And the behaviorist said, she thinks she's going to die every time a new person comes into the house. I mean, how do you tell her you're not?
Mhm.
And so anyway, I learned firsthand when I worked at the shelter. I take things very, to heart, and I learned that they are all individuals and they all have a story. I think it's much easier when you think of a big picture with statistics because you don't know them,
It's not
right?
personal. Yeah. You don't
It's
personalize
not
it.
personal. So I think this is how I kind of think of the statistics. It's like it's just a stat. It doesn't mean anything. But if you met each and every one of them, maybe you would see that there's more than just this random stat that makes you feel nice, like we reached this or we have this award. It doesn't mean anything.
It really doesn't, and that's where I go back to the we shouldn't be judged on a number, right? An arbitrary number.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a tragedy for animal sheltering,
Mhm.
for to watch this from where I'm at, right, has just been. I mean, you look at situations where they have embedded. I mean, look at Austin. It's not a mecca of anything.
At
I mean,
all.
you've got one of their own council people saying she wouldn't put her worst enemy in their animal shelter because it's so hot and it's so crowded and animals are warehoused in crates. You
Hmm.
know, look deeper. I mean, I would just tell your listeners, you don't have to love everything we're saying, but just look deeper, just educate yourself with facts, and if you don't want them from our website, everything on our web feature it's all factual information. I mean, it's all based on media reports and lawsuits and historical documents. It's all true. And if you don't have a problem with it, then that's your prerogative. But the reality is that right now what we're seeing is that the goal of sheltering is to stop sheltering.
Hmm.
I mean, I've got an emergency response team in my department, which is a team of caseworkers who take calls from all over the country. So it's phone work, it's not field work, but I've found, three abandoned dogs, or I've found, a colony of cats. And I cannot tell you how much extra time we have been spending the last few years trying to find a facility to take animals in. I mean, we have to, you know, make a donation to cover their care, or that's not, and I'm not going to say that's not our job, because it's our job, because we're PETA, so we're here for all the animals. But at the same time, it's like that shouldn't be our job. We
Right.
shouldn't have to, but it's incredible. I mean, the amount of time that we spend trying to find someone to take animals in is unbelievable. You know, when there are facilities locally, but everybody says they're full. Well, of
Mhm.
course you're full. I mean, yes, everybody's full. I mean, that's
And then we try to blame it on things like COVID. Oh, it really set us back. Or the reality is, it's a combination of what we're not doing right. And
thank you.
I
I
would love.
agree.
I would love to see, and including you, including PETA, not you specifically, Daphna, but uh, all these large organizations. I would love for all of you to team up, create scholarships for veterinary workers to encourage them to get into the field. Let's go into these communities that have a higher stray population. Let's, encourage some of the youth there. Let's educate them to, get into this profession, start their own veterinary clinics in their communities and provide these services, maybe at a subsidized cost. Maybe we can work on legislation to really work, because look, an animal problem isn't an animal problem, it's a people problem, and we know
Yeah.
that. And so we have to find ways to get back into these communities
Yeah.
and really stop it from there.
And we
So
need to focus on, where are these animals coming from? Why are people still buying from pet shops? I mean, can we please just do away with that? Just ban pet shops, please. No animal should be sold in pet shops. And then, obviously we are also against breeding because we've got all the shelters are full.
mhm.
If your heart is set on a specific breed, you can adopt. I mean, look on Pet Finder. I challenge you to name a breed that's not available somewhere on Pet Finder. And it's just, it's people being selfish
Mhm.
and thinking, well, it's just the one, I'm just not going to make a difference if it is going to make a difference. It's just like voting, it makes a difference. One person can make a difference and does make a difference. So don't pass the buck to somebody else so that you can buy a purebred French bulldog puppy. And I know your listeners probably aren't that audience, so yay, but
Well,
I do think,
you'd be surprised. A lot of people
oh
in this
gosh, help
industry,
me.
a lot of people in this industry do get purebreds. There was actually a case. He was a friend of mine growing up, and we lost touch. But his wife, maybe fiance at the time, was a director at a shelter, and she actually got like, I don't. They put so much pressure on her because she adopted, or no, I'm sorry, she bought like border collies. She was a horse girl and wanted border collies, and so the community just went crazy on her. And I think she resigned because of the pressure. But it's like you're in that high visible position, and you're
I
going
mean, you
out.
can't turn around without finding a border collie in a shelter. That's
Mhm.
ridiculous. But I don't even care what breed it is. I
Mhm.
think if you are aware that there's an overpopulation crisis and animals are in need of a home and you don't adopt, then you're part of the problem. I
Mhm.
mean, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And I have very low tolerance for people who buy dogs because I've known so many wonderful dogs that
Yeah.
I would have adopted if I could have. So,
My dog's he's adopted, and he's a fake purebred. He came into the shelter. He looked at me that I called him a fake pure whatever. Um, but he was really sick, and they thought he had parvo. He was this Roddy pup, and somebody bought him off this backyard breeder. Like they got lied to, and then they couldn't afford care, and so like he was potentially a euthanasia candidate, but eventually he came home as a foster and has been with us for 5 years and is one of the best dogs. And I mean, I would challenge anybody. He is the best dog in the world, but it's just
what's his name?
his name is Mooney.
Nice.
Yeah, Mooney the mini Roddy. Um, but yeah, uh, Daphne, this is an excellent episode. I'm sure there's some, people will have their own opinion and take. You're more than welcome to reach out to me at podcast@keepithumane.com, podcast@keepithumane.com. And yeah, check out PETA's website. There's a lot of resources on there. It's not just about this, but this is really a great topic that we need to find a way to break down these barriers. Again, remove the cocaine from Coca-Cola, still be that brand, but provide the service maybe without that
I
emotional
think
drug.
I mean there's no reality based. I mean that nothing is based in reality that's being relayed, I think. I mean,
Mhm.
I think it's nice to say save them all, but it doesn't mean anything. And I don't remember what the first deadline for so-called no kill was, but it wasn't 2025. And
Mhm.
it's just
It was like
It,
2014 or 2015 at first or
it
something.
was a long time ago, but it's like a willful burying of head in the sand, and it's ignoring the reality. And you can say all the nice things that sound really nice, but meanwhile, animals are suffering out on the street. And I think that at this point, while I don't, I'm not familiar with all the programs, but what I am familiar with is the consequences of the program that impacts places like Danville or Norfolk or Virginia Beach or,
There was a
the,
place in Indianapolis too, right? They
oh
had
my
a
gosh,
yeah.
yeah, that
Yeah.
I think you had those two gals on your show. Uh,
They were on another. I'm familiar with the podcast. Yeah, they were on
oh,
there.
okay, okay.
Hmm.
Sorry.
No, it's
Um,
hey, I it's easy to get confused with all the animal welfare podcasts out there. So yeah, definitely. But there's
um,
yeah.
anyway, yes, two people got fired for doing a background check on an adopter, which I think is just uh, unspeakable. I don't even have words for that. It's like
Hmm.
you're trying to safeguard the fate of an animal and you care, and
Hmm.
your reward is a pink slip. It's
It
insanity.
doesn't make sense.
I did want to tell your listeners too. I mean, I know for a lot of people this does hit home, and I'm happy to share my email address if that's appropriate.
Oh, absolutely, please.
But if people do want to email me, it's my first name and my last initial, so DAPHNAN at PETA.org, and I may have to get you in touch with someone else, but I'm happy to hear from people in this field. And this is where I got started in this field. I mean, I was already vegetarian when I started at the animal shelter. I wasn't vegan yet, but it just working at an open admission animal shelter. I mean, the place was open 365 days a year from 9 to 7 every single day. No day was closed. And, every time that intake, somebody came in, it would buzz and, my heart would sink. If you were out like cleaning or doing something, you'd know that somebody was waiting for you. And I have endless admiration for people who work in animal shelters, especially open admission animal shelters, and especially euthanasia technicians. And I was on a rescue last a couple weeks ago, and one of the people there was an animal control person who was the only euthanasia technician for the last 2+ decades in one rural county. And that shouldn't be that way. And anyway, it's a very difficult job, and I take my hat off for anybody who performs this job day in and day out. And I want them to know that they are appreciated, and that I know it doesn't feel that way when you have not just your own community sometimes that just doesn't understand, but then people within our own field sort of falling for this nonsense, which is causing a rift. And I remember speaking about this divisiveness and this rift at a conference somewhere more than 10 years ago. So it has been going on for a while.
Mhm. Well,
But I think it's getting worse for animals. I can 100% tell you that because I just think that animals are turned away. There's the message being that the shelter is the worst place that an animal can go to is a very dangerous message, and just because you don't see them struggling to survive or dying on the street, and sometimes we do, but for those we don't, they are there. And in a lot of situations, they are there because your local shelter turned them away. And, we need open admission shelters. We need open door shelters, and we need the people who are at those shelters to stay strong and to know that, you know, if anybody's pointing the finger at them, there are just as many people not pointing the finger at them and putting two hands together to say thank you. So I hope that those people who work in open admission shelters know that we do appreciate them, because I think that message is lost when you do have bullying and harassment. And I think Best Friends has gotten very good at distancing themselves from that stuff, but they're the ones who they like you said in that paragraph, it's like they have created a culture of hate, and they incite people against their local shelter workers, and I think that's criminal.
I I I get it, and I think too, like the biggest thing for me is when I started in this industry, I didn't even know about this culture yet. I was warned about some of like the the bunny huggers is what this one kind of grumpy officer used to talk about. Oh, you're gonna humaniacs is what he called them, but it wasn't at the level of this no kill stuff. And I learned early on that like he was kind of this jaded angry. He was what the dog catcher was made up after in the movies. Like he was that
Mhm.
prototypical, um, you know, easy typecast dog catcher. But I learned early on that not all of us were like that. A lot of us are really compassionate. We really take a lot of pride in the work that we do. And
Yes.
I made this mental note that I was going to like do whatever I could in the industry to help change the image of this dog pound and dog catcher because I owed it not only to myself, but I felt like I owed it to everybody in the industry because our work is so undervalued. And that's what got me so upset when I found out that there was this internal fighting. When I realized that I was like, wait, we have another organization within the animal welfare world that says I'm not doing a good job because my live release rate isn't what their expectation is. And I was dumbfounded by it. I kind of took it personally. We talk about ego. I kind of took it personally. I was like, wait, shouldn't you be here supporting us, like lifting us up, not knocking us down just because we're not at the level that you think, right? They don't, again, they don't have anything to support it. That's just, they came up with this number, they rode with it, and now it's this gold standard that doesn't, again, it's arbitrary. And so that's why I've been so outspoken on feeling this way. That's why we created smart shelters. That's why we, really want to continue to move forward and give the people in the community an opportunity to just be valued for the hard work that they do and not be judged for the hard work that they do.
Yeah. And to be cherished and to be appreciated because they are helping their community, both animal and human. And a lot of the stories that we get, a lot of the people that we meet, are my heart goes out to them too.
Mhm.
Yes, their animal is caught in the middle of a bad situation and that animal has no control. But, it could be a domestic violence situation. It could be someone who's lost their job unexpectedly. I mean, there's somebody who went into the hospital or someone whose relative died. I mean,
Sure.
things do happen and those animals need help, and turning them away from a shelter is abandoning them,
Absolutely.
and abandoning the people who are, as you said, there to care for them. So I think it's just really important to remind listeners, like, reality is reality, and we, some people are comfortable turning away from it, but it's not going to change just because you're not looking at it in the eye. So I do encourage people to please, even if it means things are harder for you, you're, we have the luxury of making our own choices and we can speak for ourselves and we can, you know, we, we control our fate to some extent and animals don't. So if we can help, um, make their lives better or have them safer or if euthanasia is the most humane option that we can offer them for whatever reason, whether it's medical or behavioral or then, that's a big responsibility. And I do want people to know they're appreciated for having that responsibility because it's really hard and I know firsthand that it is.
Well, I love that, and I really appreciate you taking the time today to jump on and talk about a hard subject. We appreciate the support, and we definitely appreciate you being a friend of the show. And you're welcome back at any time.
And thank you.
Was there anything else that we want to make sure that our listeners know before we end the program today?
No, just visit the website at PETA.org best friends. And, if you have any questions, drop me a line. And thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Daphna. It's great having you. And this part's always weird doing it on my own, but I usually have my co-host with me. Shout out to Ashley and Ashley. They're both they're both busy today, doing their 9 to 5, and so I appreciate again you taking the time today. And let's continue to help people, help animals, and keep it humane.